Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode number 53. Today we're talking about 0.96 Climate Platform Overhaul and John's Smart Home. But as usual, joining us today we have Phil. Hey Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And as I mentioned, we've also got John. Hey John.
Hey guys.
Whereabouts in the world are you from, John?
I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Ah, nice.
That is very cool. It's a beautiful place.
Yes, it is.
Today's episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. Configuration is via the user interface, so no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So we've got some fun stuff going on with Home Assistant. So let's jump right into it. So first of all, Home Assistant Cast. Not sure if how many people have seen the blog post, but Paul has basically put out a blog post saying, hey, for my birthday, I decided to release this interface change a little bit so that you can display Home Assistant on pretty much any Google Chromecast capable device. So there is a blog post around that, but it looks pretty cool. I mean, I think Phil and I both chatted about it offline as well, and we've chatted about it with Paulus and Pascal and stuff. It looks really interesting. Phil, what are your thoughts around it?
I saw the tweet come out and I immediately my mind went crazy with sort of automation ideas. I think I replied to the Home Assistant tweet. I was like, straight away, like if you want a briefing in the morning to say, what your commute is, it's easy to do now with a Lovelace travel time card. If there's a guest over, you could put like Wi-Fi information up, so many like cool use cases for this. I'm actually really jealous that I'm not really in the Google Cast like ecosystem, so it's not really going. Yeah, I'm very jealous, but yeah, it's been pretty popular. I think there was a tweet from Android headlines. The Nest Home Hub is finally useful thanks to Home Assistant. So yeah, like I think it's a really popular little feature then. And yeah, it's good to see. We had no idea this was coming, and I'm guessing Paulus is just one of those crazy ideas in the back of his head. He's just like, yep, I'll just pluck that out, and here we go. So yeah, I think it was a nice little surprise.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. So I was thinking about it yesterday, and I was like, do I get a Google Home Hub? But I don't know. I think I have two homes, and I have a bunch of Amazon Echoes, so I can go either way, but I don't know if I know. Yeah.
It's really hard not to get a Google Home at the moment, right? Like, they just give, I don't know if it's the same where you guys are, but here they just try and give them away like candy. I think when they launched, we had like the local football, you would go to the football and they'll be out there, like just handing them out for free to people. I'm a Google One subscriber, so I think last month they were just giving them out to existing Google One subscribers for free, like the Home Minis. Wow. You sign up for a new phone contract, here's a free Google Home. Like, it's really hard not to get one for free. So I've so far avoided it. Yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks. Yeah, no.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, John, I for me, at least here in Canada, I see that as well. Like, hey, you bought a TV, congrats, here's a Google Home. Hey, you bought a whatever, here's a Google Home. I don't know. I have a few friends in the US that say kind of the same thing. I mean, John.
I think it's similar here in the US, but I also think that Amazon Echo is pretty prevalent also because Amazon, there's commercials for it, there's advertisements for it everywhere. I mean, you can get everything, 2-day shipping, great. And they advertise the Echo, along with that, and the Echo Show and all those things. Mm-hmm. So I do see advertisements for the Google devices, but it doesn't seem as popular anywhere else.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't really watch a ton of TV, but I haven't seen. I've seen like billboards on for the Google Home and stuff. I haven't like you see ads on the Echo, right? Where like on TV or on like you're watching Super Bowl. Hey, here's the ads. You're watching whatever. Here's the ads. So. And
obviously, especially if you're shopping on Amazon, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Incidentally, at the time of this recording, I mean, tomorrow and day after are Prime Day, so I'm getting excited. So I'm going to see what I can snag.
Grab a good Google Home.
That's right. That's right. On Prime days, yeah.
So 0.96 is here, and it's a pretty big release in terms of, I would say, user interface. But I think before we get onto that, there's a big change to the climate platform. As Rohan mentioned before, it's such a big change. We didn't want to get on the podcast and accidentally claim it was something that it's not. So we've got Paulus. We had a quick chat with Paulus before, just to explain what the overhaul is and what it means in this release. So, Paulus, what is the climate platform? Like, what have you done for this release?
We did a giant refactor of the climate integration, but that should mainly be under the hood. Like, you might have some breaking changes in your automations, but what generally happened is that we made some mistakes when the way the climate integration evolved over time. But the biggest mistake we made is that we conflated operation mode with operating mode. So, for example, if you put your thermostat in heating and say, I want the house to be heated to like 20 Celsius, then operating mode is what it's currently doing. So if it's below 20 Celsius, it's heating. But if it's above 20 Celsius, it's idle because there's nothing going on.
Right.
And so the thermostat state would contain, depending on the integration, one of the two.
Got it.
And this was a big pain point, especially when we want to integrate with things like Google or Alexa, because they expect like a fixed set of operation modes. They don't really care about operating modes because you just want to. When you change your thermostat, you change the operation mode, not the operating mode.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so Pascal spearheaded this project and like looked at every different like thermostat and AC system in the world and came up with a design that fits pretty much everything. So we're now very strict in what can be an operation mode. So it's like heat, cool, or like a heat cool. So that's like both, where you have like a range with like an upper and a lower bound. And then things like eco or an away mode or these kind of things that people used to like kind of sneak into our operation modes, they are now all exposed as presets. And so a preset pretty much means that like we just use an existing operation mode, but we have different set points that we are targeting, or we're heating and cooling slower because we're in eco mode.
Right.
And this approach allowed us to just kind of like, make it work perfectly with like all integrations out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the idea was that if you have an Ecobee or if you have a Homatics or whatever thermostat, everything works in the same way. Like before, every integration was working a bit different, and now we have one model. They implemented by the platforms, so you can now mix up Ecobee and Z-Wave Climate, and it works exactly in the same way.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's super important too, especially driving towards 1.0, kind of some of the stuff we talked about, right? You want that standardization of the abstraction layer where you kind of say, okay, I want to do this, and then it translates in the back to whatever.
It's now like the light integrations. So if you have IKEA or Philips, everything looks the same on Home Assistant.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah, and so it took a lot of work to get this climate change like happening, because first Pascal did all the work on like designing a new core system, but then we had to migrate all the existing integrations that Home Assistant has to offer. And so I think in the end, like over 15 people have been contributing code for this, working like long time, like, tirelessly just to like go through all the integrations, migrating it. Because there's like, I don't know how many integrations were there, like 35 or something, Pascal?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And so
or 45, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we could not merge it with not having, migrated everything, because then this integration would just stop working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
That was over 5,000 lines code.
Okay.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that's why it's an important feature in this one. Also in 0.96 is a new sidebar that has come out, and this is probably the biggest change to Home Assistant's UI, I think, since Lovelace. Would that be fair to say, Rohan? You've been playing with the beta.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it looks a little neater, looks a lot more organized. Personally, I think it's great. I did see, Juan from 1M Tech, he mocked it up, I think he posted it on Twitter, and I was like, hey, this actually looks pretty cool. I didn't think that they were gonna, like, the Home Assistant core team is gonna take it and integrate it, which I'm kind of happy that they did. I think it looks really neat. So yeah, the new sidebar, basically, the notifications pane is a little different. It's at the bottom. The developer tools are in its own section. You know, there's a couple other different pieces in there that are hidden under the developer tools, things like your services and templates and stuff like that. One of the other things as well is the advanced mode. Essentially what happens is with advanced mode, we're hiding a bunch of other stuff that we don't always need to use. So under your profile, there's actually that too now. So that some of that stuff is hidden. Yeah, and then reloading automations, configs, and stuff like that from the interface. You need to just flip something on.
It actually caught me out a bit. I was changing an automation. I was like, oh, all right, I'll just go into general configuration, and the standard stuff there is still there, like, you know, your location and your time zone and all that. And then down the bottom where the reload is, I'm like, oh, well, that's missing. Okay, maybe I just need to refresh the UI or something. But there's a tiny, at the very bottom of the new developer tool section, there's a little line saying if you're missing anything in your configuration.yaml file, you just need to enable advanced mode. So once you do that, then all those things will come back. So that's a little trick.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you're referring to the same thing, but there's actually a advanced mode toggle switch as well, where you can go flip it on, and because it's under your profile. If you run into that, check it out there.
I've always been a big fan of the anything offering an advanced mode. That was always a nice feature to have when you come across it.
Yeah, and that way it's simple, unless you want to do, again, something advanced, and then flip it on, and then you can do, and that's on a per profile basis.
Yeah, that's
right. So
yes, you're right. Yeah, it is hidden there. That's okay. My apologies, but that's cool.
Yeah,
I'm glad I don't have to edit YAML for that.
Yeah, so even if you, let's say you have a kid and maybe a spouse, maybe you and the spouse want to do advanced mode, so because you guys can make more changes, things like that. Your kids, maybe you don't necessarily want them mucking around or whatever, and so just leave it off. And then if they ever want to do anything, then great, they can turn it on. Normally, if I had kids, I wouldn't give them an admin privilege anyways. but let's say you do, right? Hypothetical situation. So, but yeah, it is on a per profile basis, so that's pretty cool as well.
So I think that is it's given the UI a lot more room, just having that sidebar collapsed. So that's going to be really good for users that have Home Assistant, like the Lovelace, on a tablet or anything like that. It's a nice little, just makes things a little neater for the user interface, I think.
Yeah. So great work, Juan. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Some new features that are landing in 0.96. We have the worldwide Lightning Location Network. It sounds like the name of a superhero sort of thing. Yeah. So using the geolocation platform in Home Assistant, you can now have Home Assistant alert you when lightning is nearby. And that's another integration from Aaron Batcher. So awesome. Like, I really like this sort of stuff where Home Assistant can do some safety or respond to events in real time. And that's a great use of the geolocation library there.
Zigbee device trackers, you can now use them with the ZHA component. So if you're using the ZHA component, anything Zigbee that's a device tracker, that comes in as a device tracker. So for example, the SmartThings arrival tracker is what they tested with. So you can actually use that and mark someone with home or away or whatever based on that.
That's cool. Because, I know I'm using Zigbee to MQTT, so I've always wondered how, like, I thought the arrival sensor would be a SmartThings sort of thing that would just connect directly to the hub somehow. But if it's Zigbee based, that's very cool. That just sort of opens it up to other potential users as well.
Yeah, most of SmartThings stuff is Zigbee based. I actually have one of those arrival sensors somewhere on my table, which I can't find because it's a mess. But yeah, it all it does. But you're right, it does connect back to the hub, but it connects to the hub with Zigbee because that's what it's programmed with, right? So that's its base station. So if you program it to this, and great. It'll come and talk to this. So
That's awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Another new platform entering Home Assistant this release is the Notion Home Monitoring component. So Notion is an Oreo-sized sensor you can place around your home to get alerts for opening doors, water leaks, and temperature changes. So the sensors are now supported in Home Assistant. New sensors that you may add to your account won't automatically be discovered. That'll come in a future pull request. But so this is a cloud-based smart home integration, I'm guessing. So cool to see some more sensors and data coming into Home Assistant.
Interesting. I'm curious to know if those are Wi-Fi or if they're Zigbee, Z-Wave. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Well, they're pretty small, so you'd think maybe Bluetooth or low power requirement device. I couldn't see them being Wi-Fi. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but Wi-Fi would be.
I wonder what the power requirements are on them.
Yeah. Must be BLE or something. So maybe I'll ping. I think that's one of Aaron's integration as well. So maybe I'll ping them. That's actually kind of interesting. Also, Valox ventilation units. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but if you've got a Valox ventilation unit, you can use it to control Home Assistant. You can use Home Assistant to control it using their local WebSocket API. So the fan platform is basically what's utilized under the covers with Home Assistant. And you can turn on and off the unit with either a toggle switch or some kind of a ventilation profile through a service call.
And another component that's been added may not be useful for everyone, but I think it's pretty powerful. It's the template vacuum platform. So if you've got an obscure smart vacuum that can't integrate with Home Assistant, there is now the ability to use a combination of Home Assistant templates as well as scripts and automations to enable Home Assistant to control that vacuum cleaner. So you could have like a script that uses a curl call or something like that can control a connected vacuum cleaner. And then you can import that into Home Assistant because Home Assistant has the concept of a vacuum cleaner. You can then import that into Home Assistant as a vacuum cleaner and then expose services like, start this process, start cleaning this room, start doing that. So that's really cool.
Cool. So some breaking changes. So the temperature attribute from SimpliSafe alarm panels, the control panels, those have been removed. So their API, just because of the way their API was written, it's a private API. So it's a bit tricky to get the information pretty reliably. So now they've basically removed it and just kind of save you from having that inconsistent information.
And some Zigbee entities for the Zigbee home automation component are being removed. From this release, additional parameters for some Zigbee devices will be moved to the device entity, which is going to be a new device entity. So things like link quality, the last seen, they will now exist against that device object in Home Assistant. And there's also going to be some new sensors added if you're running any battery-operated Zigbee devices. They're actually going to get their own sensor in Home Assistant instead of having to rely on the attributes for that device.
Right. The ambient solar radiation sensor now measures its values in lux. So if you have any automations that use any other values, it's going to change.
There's a couple of breaking changes for Netatmo. The configuration of individual monitored conditions has been removed. So if you've got that in your config YAML files, you'll need to remove that. And additionally, if the type of device you're linking cannot be determined by Home Assistant, it's going to default to a valve, which will be basically a thermostat component in Home Assistant. So, like turn on, turn off, and all that sort of stuff. So if you do run into any issues with and you're using an Netatmo device, just watch out for that one in this release. Just maybe double check that everything's still working as expected.
I'm not sure how many people this affects, but the New South Wales Rural Fire Service component has been updated. So the JSON feed that used to use it, that it used to consume, now uses HTTPS. So if you're using any templates or automations, the external ID might change. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, I don't think that will affect too many people, but good to see that we're moving over to HTTPS.
Mm-hmm.
And some minor but noteworthy updates in this release. Sonos gets a new play queue service. So it makes it possible to force Sonos to start playing from a queue instead of a last played source. So this will make it possible to switch from a radio stream to playing from a like Spotify playlist or local playlist. So that's a great little addition there if you're a Sonos user.
That's cool. And templates can now be used in the for state of triggers. So basically, if you have a automation that fires when a state has been true for a certain period of time, you can now say, hey, if it's been true for X amount of time, now trigger it. So, which is interesting because I've actually been looking for a way to do this for me. So this is great.
Yeah, I think the hack around used to be I've had to do it with like a delay template or a script and have a delay sort of thing. But yeah, now with this as part of the trigger, that's going to be a great little addition.
Yeah, so you can say, hey, listen, if my temperature is higher than, let's call it X degrees for more than 1 minute, then do whatever, right? Or, if your motion has been detected after this long, okay, then maybe there's something else going on. Do whatever task.
Yeah.
So,
but then that X can also be variable now with the power of templates.
Yes, exactly. So, John, now it's on to you. Let's. How long have you been using Home Assistant?
So I've been using Home Assistant now for just over 2 years.
Yeah.
Originally started with OpenHab and quickly jumped back over to Home Assistant. Didn't care for the Java backend. So
interesting. It's that seems to be a common theme actually, because we've had a couple of other folks on here that same deal. They started on OpenHab and they're like, ugh, Java, I don't want to deal with that.
Right, exactly. And the configuration of OpenHab, it was just a lot more convoluted than it needed to be, I thought.
Interesting. Okay.
And so you've obviously experienced OpenHab and Home Assistant. Would you say that Home Assistant is easier to config and code or well, maybe not code, but create automations than OpenHab is?
Absolutely. I thought that working with YAML from the get-go was extremely easy versus trying to write complex, I forget what OpenHab uses nowadays, but complex scripts in OpenHab in the Java interpreter. It was very confusing, especially without a Java background.
So do you, because I haven't really used OpenHab myself, to create an automation, do you have to do it in Java as opposed to YAML?
No, you don't. But they have it's another type of language, but it was similar to Java.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. And so was OpenHab your first foray into home automation, or how did you get started with your smart home, I guess?
Well, I originally got started with home automation when I was a kid. My dad, actually, he ran X10 devices all around our house.
Yep.
And I thought it was really silly back in the day. Why are you plugging these little modules everywhere and these lamps into them? What are you doing?
Yes. Yeah. I love X10. Those memories.
Using a little screwdriver to program the node ID and all those.
Yes.
Yes. Run them around and yelling at me to change the node ID on that one and not this one, So that was my first introduction to it. And then really getting accustomed to, coming home at night and, the lights are already on. That's really neat,
Yeah.
So as I was growing up, I experienced kind of home automation at its base, its core, which was X10 when it first came out. So.
That's awesome. I think my dad still has a couple of X10 devices. Just, he doesn't use them, but I think they're lying in his basement somewhere.
Yeah. I think I have a couple of my dad's old ones now too.
That's funny.
I've got some in a box somewhere because I tried to sell them on eBay, but no one wants them anymore. So.
Exactly.
That's right.
So eventually, once I got older and moved out and all of that stuff happened, I carried the X10 stuff with me, and eventually that transitioned into Insteon hardware. Which was the came after X10, and so now I'm using the core of my stuff is all Insteon. So all lights and modules and switches and all that kind of stuff that I've run are all Insteon based. So
that's cool.
Interesting. How do you find Insteon? Because I've heard mixed reviews. Some people say, yeah, it's great, it works, it's solid, whatever. And some people are like, well, you're kind of locked in and it's very static, like you can't change a ton of stuff in it and so on and so forth. What's your thoughts on that?
I honestly think it's incredibly not only flexible, but also robust. So you can you have a central hub, for instance, and then you would add a device and pair it with the hub, just like you would any other smart home technology. But then as you add more devices to your network gets more robust. So instead of devices communicating only with the hub, they communicate with each other.
Right.
So it's almost
sort of like
creating
Zigbee, Z-Wave, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're creating
where it meshes.
A mesh network essentially.
Interesting. Okay.
And also, once everything is configured, it literally just works all the time. I don't have to think twice or check batteries or whatever. Like if I want to turn a light switch on, the light switch turns on. There's no question of if the light switch turned on.
Right. Right.
So is it locked into a single brand? Like, is Insteon the protocol, or is Insteon the brand, and it controls everything, and you can only buy Insteon like devices? Like,
it's both, actually. So
Okay.
Insteon is a company which makes products, but it's also a protocol.
Yeah.
Right.
It's similar to my Lutron switches, where they use their own proprietary little communication protocol, but it's also manufactured by Lutron, right? It's the same way.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So I'm using a hub or a central hub by Universal Devices called the ISY 994i.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main Insteon hub. So everything communicates to that, and then Home Assistant grabs data directly from it.
Nice. Okay.
Right. So I was going to ask. So where does Home Assistant come into this now? So because I believe Insteon does have its own automation engine, which may be kind of basic, or am I mistaken there?
No, it does. Yep.
Right. So for you, where does Home Assistant plug in? So you've got your Insteon stuff. You've got HAS. So where's the integration, or what are you doing?
So right now I'm running Home Assistant on a Docker container.
Yeah.
And Home Assistant lives on a Synology NAS. And it's pulling everything, all the data over the network from different devices from there.
Got it. Okay.
Just on your Synology, how have you found Home Assistant running on there? Have you run into any slowness or anything? Mine got a bit sluggish, so I had to move away, but I'm guessing I'm running a fair bit.
No, I haven't run into any problems at all. It seems to just work, and it's incredibly stable.
Nice. Okay. That's awesome. So, I mean, in the other sense of things, so do your automations sit on Insteon, or do they sit in Home Assistant, or?
So the Insteon platform has the ability to create its own automations within the Insteon, kind of firmware. What I've chosen to do is run literally everything out of Home Assistant. So the Insteon hub is basically kind of a null device. It's just passing traffic and data between Home Assistant and devices. So I didn't want to confuse it, basically.
Yeah, just a bridge, essentially, at that point, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And with that platform, I've also managed to run the Universal Devices hub that I'm using has the ability to also communicate via Zigbee or Z-Wave. I believe just Z-Wave.
So it's got those radios built in?
It's got the radio built in also, yes. So it communicates via Insteon as well as Z-Wave. And then I've got a Z-Wave thermostat, which controls the climate.
Okay.
Oh, that's really cool.
So you're pretty into that, let's call it the RF ecosystem there. Which is Zigbee, Z-Wave, whatever. So not a lot of Wi-Fi. You may have a few things, but
a couple of Wi-Fi.
That's kind of it.
Yep.
Yeah. So what? Well, I guess let's talk about what devices you've got. So what kind of stuff do you have in your smart home?
So I have LIFX light bulbs.
Okay.
Which I'm a big fan of. I really like the not only the spectrum that they support, but also the scale of light that they support.
Right.
In the early days, I saw a kind of a breakdown between Hue and LIFX, and LIFX just blew Hue out of the water as far as what it supported and how much light output you had and those kind of things. So I went with LIFX from the get-go, even though they were more expensive. Now they're roughly the same, but there's no hub either. So
how do you find having light bulbs on the Wi-Fi network? One of the big things that sort of stopped me from going down with LIFX was I didn't want, my Netflix to be slow because I was trying to turn off and on light bulbs, if that makes sense. And I found with the more IoT gadgets I've added, I had to upgrade my Wi-Fi router anyway because I eventually got too many devices. That's without having all the light bulbs on the Wi-Fi. So I can only imagine, if you've got 20 odd lights that need to be added to your Wi-Fi network, it's surely going to add a bit of strain somewhere or something like that.
I was running into that initially when you start adding a lot more Wi-Fi devices, like you were talking about, that colliding the network and causing slowdowns and things like that. So one of the things that I did to overcome that was I'm running Unify network hardware, and I created a secondary AP virtually on Unify just for all the smart home devices. So I've segregated all the smart home devices from everything else.
Right, that makes sense.
And because of that, I don't experience any slowdowns or drops really anymore.
Right.
Okay. That's cool.
So all the smart home devices basically live in their own subnet.
That makes sense. So do you have any, like when you interface with your Instagram stuff or with whatever, do you typically use voice? Do you use tablets? What's that look like?
Well, actually, back to your previous question of devices I have around the home. So I have the LifeX for lights. I also have a couple of Sonos speakers. I originally had the Amazon Echoes, and they were great, but I didn't like the fact that I couldn't use a media player with them. That was kind of locked into the ecosystem which Amazon provided, which I didn't care much for. So I jumped over to the Sonos platform, which I really love. It works really well, and it sounds great. So in addition to that, I have a couple of older Nexus tablets around the house.
Okay.
So I can use those to display Home Assistant and use that kind of as a heads-up display if you want to use it. And I'm running Lovelace on those. Also on my desk here at work, I have a Raspberry Pi with the 7-inch touchscreen, and I'm running Home Assistant UI on that also. So that just acts as a desktop interface to it.
So you did kind of a DIY touchscreen plus blah 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 whatever on the Raspberry Pi.
Yep, you got it.
Cool, very cool.
And how do you find that as responsive with Lovelace? Is it a bit slow because it's powered by the Raspberry Pi, or is it okay?
It actually runs extremely well. I haven't had any slowdowns or problems with it whatsoever. So I'm using, I believe I'm using Chrome in kiosk mode on the tablet or on the Raspberry Pi.
On the Pi, interesting.
Right, okay. So what are you using for presence in your home? Are you doing anything fancy with Bluetooth beacons, or are you just using Wi-Fi?
Right now I'm doing Wi-Fi for presence detection, as well as the iOS app, which and the combination of both of those seems to work pretty well together.
Yep. Yeah, I find Wi-Fi pretty reliable. As long as your battery doesn't run out, then yeah, that's pretty solid.
For a while there, I was running Bluetooth Bluetooth beacons, and that just got a little hairy, and it would work pretty well for a while, and then it just got to be more cumbersome than it was worth. So.
Yeah, fair. More maintenance, more stuff to deal with.
Yep.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm going to just ask a personal question. With all your frequencies that you're running, you said before you have that controller that has, Z-Wave and Zigbee and all that. How do you find interference with like clashing technologies? For example, I'm running Zigbee and Z-Wave and Wi-Fi here in my home, but the Zigbee range is really shocking. So have you got any interference that you've had to overcome with your mesh networks?
I honestly haven't encountered any problems at all with it. But then again, I'm only running a single Z-Wave device right now, which is the thermostat.
So yeah, because my Z-Waves is solid. Like all the powered stuff acts as repeaters, and that's fine. And I'm using Zigbee to MQTT, and I've got every downlight is basically a Zigbee downlight at the moment.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, like they cover the whole house, but there's just lots of dropouts. I'll turn a group on and only one light will come on from the whole group or something like that. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you can do about that.
I know. I'm just going to... It's one of my to-dos, right, to fix it. It's not working.
Rebuild your network,
start over.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have to halve the house, put half of the Zigbee stuff at one end of the house and run another controller at the other end and do it that way.
Just run a big sheet of tinfoil between the two houses. There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. There we go. There's the answer. That'll make sense.
Barrier. So what are some of your favorite automations and stuff, John? I mean, in terms of what you've done, or how do they improve your quality of life?
I really like basically not having to interact with my home at all. Basically, what I'm trying to say is when my alarm clock goes off in the morning, I have an automation that kicks off that turns the lights on and fades them in, no matter if it's dark outside or not. And I have a Sonos speaker that turns on and plays some music, and it slowly fades the volume in, for instance. And then it's also smart enough to know, if it's a work day or if it's a weekend or if it's a holiday or if I'm working from home or not, and turn on lights kind of as I need them. So as I wake up and get up out of bed, for instance, the hallway light turns on, or the bathroom light turns on, or the kitchen lights turn on, depending on what I would need, when I would need it to happen. So those kind of automations where very little interaction from me is required. It just does what I would do anyways.
That's cool.
Nice. And so have you gone to, and this is something I've always thought about, but if you have like dynamic waking up times, have you got to the point where you could ask one of your voice assistants to set an alarm at a random time, and then Home Assistant will detect when that alarm goes off and then kick off your morning routine, as opposed to it being at 7 a.m. every morning, do the same thing?
Well, that kind of gets into another topic that I wanted to bring up, which is I've gotten away from hard coding any kind of values within Home Assistant and started using basically variable values in the UI. So I'll make a slider, for instance, or I'll make the ability to select numbers or time slots within the UI instead of having to hard code anything. So if I want to change the alarm clock right now, I literally grab my phone and go to my bedroom tab and change the hour and change the minute, and there's my alarm clock. I'm done.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
And then it stays that way unless I need to change it.
So in this case, Home Assistant is your alarm clock, or kind of everything gets driven by there.
Yep. Everything gets initiated from there and then driven elsewhere.
Okay.
Yep.
So you've obviously got a bit of trust there in Home Assistant that it's actually going to control that whole process of waking you up. I know.
Yeah.
I sort of broached the topic with my partner, and it was sort of like we can't afford, in the middle of the night for Home Assistant to go down, and then we don't get woken up and we're late for work. So better to keep it into a contained sort of system. But
and I ran into that. I went down that road originally, and I said, well, how much do I want to trust this system to do what it's designed to do? And at the end of the day, I kind of had to ask myself, well, at your job, you trust that the servers are going to be working, and if they're not, you're going to hear about it, right? So I basically did the same kind of thing with Home Assistant, as I set up, the ability to monitor Home Assistant and then get a notification if it goes down, or automatically restart it if it goes down.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm still at the point where I use my Echo as an alarm, and then if it's a super important meeting or something I have in the morning, I'll also put it on my phone. So a little more primitive, right? But I'm glad you're able to put that much trust into thing. And I mean, I have the auto restart and all that stuff. Well, it's not running right now, but it was at some point. But that's interesting.
Yeah, and I went through that whole process of how much do I want to trust this, and then eventually got down to the point where I could trust it. It didn't fail me, and it hasn't failed me yet. So,
wow,
why wouldn't I? So.
Touch wood.
Yeah,
that's great. yeah. Today will be the day. Okay.
Right. I will not wake up tomorrow.
just because you mentioned it. No.
Right.
So if you've got like alarms controlled via sliders in Home Assistant, what other variables have you got through your UI that you can adjust for your home?
I've got the alarm control panel. I also have thermostat control, obviously. I have a bedtime kind of automation that I created. I tend to, I'm sure a lot of us do this, but I tend to get involved with technology and kind of forget what time it is. And next thing I know, it's 2:00 in the morning and I need to wake up at 6. So I created kind of a bedtime routine for myself. So at a certain time that I can configure in the UI, my hallway light turns on, for instance, and then my bedroom lights turn on, kind of letting me know in a nice way that I need to go to bed. And that seems to help pretty well, actually. I'll be, sitting there watching TV and go, oh, wait a second, the hallway light's on. Oh, crap, what time is it? There you go.
Right.
So it's a nice reminder.
So I've got all my lights all that you can control because they're all Zigbee lights. You can control the color temperature and the brightness of each individual globe. So as the night gets, I think it's 10:30 at night, the lights will all dim down, and they'll also get a slightly yellow, just to sort of remind you. Like it doesn't necessarily have to force you, but it's like a really subtle way of telling you it's late, we're about to go to bed sort of thing. It's a great little feature. It's one of my favorite things that my home does.
Yep. I do the same kind of, I can really appreciate that. I also have an automation that turns on the lights when the sun goes down. So a lot of times I'll be working from home, for instance, and I'll notice, it's getting brighter in my room. Oh, my living room lights are on. It's probably time to stop working. And
right.
There you go.
That's a good indicator to stop working.
Right.
I should take cues from my my automations.
Another thing that I've started to use more often, or in the last couple of weeks, was the ESP Home platform.
Ooh, yeah. That's been Otto's done an awesome job on that.
Really has. I've been in the process of programming a weather display using an e-paper screen. And
nice.
The goal here is to run it off of a battery, so it is able to sit on a desktop or a counter somewhere and show me the current weather. But it's really nice to be able to pull all of that data from Home Assistant.
Oh, that's cool. So
that's very cool.
Is that like a guide you're following online, or have you just sourced the parts yourself and doing it like as your own little creation?
Yeah, just so I've done electronics kind of as a hobby for a long time. So I'm just doing it myself. So I'm just running a ESP32 development board as well as the e-paper display, and I've wired everything up and I'm programming it by hand.
Very cool.
Nice. So in terms of power supply, will that require like batteries, or will it be plugged in 24/7?
I'm probably going to run a LiPo battery.
Yep.
So one of the development boards I'm using has a LiPo charging port on it. So I'll probably run a LiPo battery and then put the device into kind of a deep sleep mode. So it'll wake up every hour, turn on Wi-Fi, grab the latest data, and then go back into a sleep mode. And because of the e-paper,
because it's e-ink, it'll just remain.
Yep. You got it.
Yeah, that's cool.
So hopefully with that setup, the battery should last months.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay.
So the flexibility of that platform is really, really neat, and I'm enjoying working with it.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That is very cool.
And is that the only like ESP stuff like you've started with?
That was kind of the first ESP gateway drug, we'll call it. I'm sure it's going to branch off into other things. I currently run a few Sonos devices around the house, and those monitor some power usage and things like that. So I'll probably convert those over to ESP Home.
Right.
I also, back in the early days, several years ago now, I created some temperature and humidity sensors that I put around the home because I wanted to find a way of monitoring temperature and humidity. And the options out there weren't very good. I looked at a few of them, and they all required, an ecosystem and a hub and all this other stuff, and I didn't really care to jump into that. So I created a couple of very small, very simple ESP8266 devices that also have a temperature and humidity component on them that monitors those, and then they actually connect via Wi-Fi and communicate to an MQTT broker. So I'll probably convert those over to ESP Home.
I'm always scared of I see like all the cool stuff being done like on that platform. I'm like, if I go down that road, then I'm gonna have so many like gadgets and all that. I've already got like Raspberry Pis just sitting in the drawer not doing anything that I'm always thinking, I'll do this, I can automate it that way. But the way Otto's made that really simple to do, I think I will go crazy automating stuff with that sort of, with all those ESPs.
Yeah,
it's true.
John, thanks a lot for joining us today.
No problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
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 Thanks to our guest today, John. If you want to see a picture of his cool little e-ink display weather station, and to check all the links to topics that we've discussed today, check out the show notes on haspodcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@haspodcast.io.